She stood at the edge of the field, quiet, barely noticed, her eyes fixed on the targets lined up in the distance. No one took her seriously. Not the trainers, not the officers, and certainly not the other candidates, most of whom had spent years preparing for this, the SWAT team selection course. But she wasn't like the others. She didn't walk in with military swagger or tactical gear worth thousands. She had no medals, no connections. Just a worn duffel bag, a second-hand rifle, and a calm focus that didn't seem to shake, even under the glares of doubt. The whispers started before the drills even began. She won't last an hour. Why is she even here? Some laughed. Others just shook their heads, wondering how someone like her, quiet, small-framed, and unknown, thought she could survive one of the toughest law enforcement tryouts in the country. It wasn't just about fitness or skill. This was about grit. Precision. The kind of sharp instinct and unshakable nerve it takes to breach a hostage situation or take the shot when seconds count. And to them, she looked like someone who'd break under pressure. Not someone who could lead a breach team into danger. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just listened. Watched. Waited. There was no point talking when no one was willing to hear. And when the first day's obstacle course began, the kind designed to wear down even elite candidates, they got exactly what they expected. She slipped during the wall climb. Hesitated during the breach simulation. Her name was marked down, flagged quietly with a red line. Rejected. Too slow. Too unprepared. Too soft. But something shifted when the range trials began. That's when they saw it. As others stumbled through their live-fire drills, missing half their shots or taking too long to clear targets, she stepped up to the line with the same calm expression she had from the beginning. No wasted movements. No second-guessing. Just a steady hand, a deep breath, and one shot after another landing dead center. Bang. Reset. Bang. Reset. The instructors fell silent. One of them leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the monitor tracking her hits. Another walked over to double-check the digital log. But it wasn't a glitch. She wasn't just shooting well, she was destroying the course record. A record that had stood for 6 years. And yet, even then, she said nothing. No smile. No celebration. Just a quiet nod, as if she already knew what she was capable of, and didn't need anyone else's approval to prove it. Still, the room had shifted. The same people who dismissed her hours ago now stood stunned. And just like that, everything about her story changed. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, is why she had come here in the first place, and what pushed her to hit every target like her life depended on it. That part, the truth behind her silence, hadn't even begun to unfold yet. Long before she ever stepped onto that SWAT training ground, her life had already been shaped by conflict, not the kind that made headlines, but the kind that quietly crushed people from the inside out. Her name was Sarah. No one remembered it that day, but they would soon enough. She wasn't a cop, she wasn't military, and she had never worn a badge. In fact, just a few months earlier, she was working double shifts as a waitress in a rundown diner off Route 47. She blended into the background there too, polite, soft-spoken, always on time. The kind of woman people didn't look at twice. The kind they forgot, even while she was standing right in front of them. But Sarah had a past. A reason. A memory that haunted every second she spent alone. She'd grown up around guns, not in the way some of the recruits had, through training or sport, but in a rougher, more desperate world. Her father, a former Marine turned survivalist, wasn't the warm, encouraging type. He believed in toughness, in silence, in making every shot count. And when her brother was taken from her, in a robbery that went too far, a robbery that was never solved, something inside her changed. That loss became her fuel. It burned quiet but steady. She didn't want revenge. She wanted control. She wanted the skills no one could ever take from her again. When she found out about the open SWAT application, she didn't hesitate. Not because she thought she'd get in, she didn't. But because she needed to try. To push herself to a place where fear had no power over her anymore. The rejection didn't surprise her. What surprised her was how much it still stung. It reminded her of every time she'd been overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving herself right. That she could walk into the heart of a storm and not flinch. The instructors weren't cruel. Just dismissive. To them, she was another civilian trying to play dress-up in a world that didn't take kindly to weakness. They didn't know that she'd spent nearly a year training in secret. Not in gyms or fancy ranges, but out in the woods behind her childhood home, using rusted cans for targets and counting every bullet because she couldn't afford to waste even one. They didn't see the bruises, the nights she went hungry so she could afford another box of ammo, the way she built her strength back after a bad car crash that almost left her paralyzed. They only saw what was on paper, no badge, no tactical resume, no reason to believe she belonged there. But the moment she pulled that trigger and shattered the record, they couldn't ignore her anymore. Still, even that didn't tell the whole story. Because what none of them knew was that Sarah had a deadline. A reason why she had to make it into the SWAT team, fast. Someone's life was hanging in the balance. And every day she wasn't ready, brought them closer to the edge. The next day, her name was on the board again. Not crossed out this time, listed. Quiet murmurs followed her through the compound. Some were impressed. Most were suspicious. Lucky shot, someone muttered. Probably just one good day. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because she knew the hard part wasn't the shooting range. It was everything else, the simulations, the combat drills, the trust exercises where teams had to move like a single mind under pressure. And trust, it turned out, was harder to earn than any score on paper. Her assigned partner was Officer Vega, a seasoned candidate who'd been waiting years for this slot to open. Built like a tank and known for his discipline, Vega wasn't thrilled to be paired with the woman who'd come out of nowhere. His words. He didn't hide his frustration. During drills, he barked at her for being half a second too slow. During tactical strategy rounds, he cut her off. "You're not thinking like a cop," he'd snap. What he didn't understand was, she wasn't trying to. She was thinking like someone who'd lived on the outside of safety her entire life. And that view was different. But she watched him, studied the way he handled pressure, the way he cleared a room, the way he instinctively read situations. There was a lot to learn, and she knew it. Still, friction was constant. When a hostage rescue drill went sideways and their team failed to extract the victims in time, Vega pointed the finger at her hesitation. The instructor didn't say much, but she could feel the shift in the air again, that slow crawling doubt creeping back in. What they didn't know was that Sarah was also racing against time. Her younger sister, Mia, had vanished 2 months ago. 1 minute, she was at a college study group, the next, gone. No answers. No leads that went anywhere. Just vague surveillance footage of her walking down a street and then nothing. Police filed it under a runaway case, and soon the calls stopped. But Sarah knew better. Mia wasn't the type to run. She was the careful one. The one who planned everything, never took risks. Something had happened. And no one was going to find out the truth but her. In between drills and late-night exhaustion, Sarah kept digging. On an old laptop in her bunk, she pieced together timelines, flagged phone records, searched chat logs Mia never meant to leave behind. One name kept coming up, a man connected to a local arms trafficking ring, someone with deep ties to corrupt security firms. And worse, there were rumors he'd moved underground, hiding inside the very system meant to stop him. Somewhere in law enforcement. Somewhere close. It wasn't just about finding her sister anymore. It was about not letting this man slip through the cracks again. That was why she needed SWAT. Not just the badge. Not just the title. But access. Inside information. The ability to go where civilians weren't allowed. And every drill, every bullet fired, every bruise she took, it all pushed her closer to that one goal. But the closer she got, the more dangerous it became. Because someone was already watching her. Tracking her. And they were willing to do whatever it took to keep the past buried. The rain came hard that night, slapping against the steel roof of the training facility like the ticking of a countdown. Sarah barely noticed. She was at the far end of the compound, crouched under the faded light of an outdoor lamp, hands wrapped tight around a folder she wasn't supposed to have. Inside were reports, internal SWAT logs, transfer memos, disciplinary notes, all tied to one name, Julian Cross. The same name she had seen pop up on Mia's last text. The same man who was quietly reassigned 6 weeks after Mia disappeared. And now, somehow, he was connected to an upcoming SWAT raid. A raid Sarah had just been added to. It wasn't coincidence. Someone had moved pieces around. Someone wanted her close to something dangerous, either to use her, or to silence her. The instructors had changed their tone. No more second chances. No more patience. It was like they were testing her limits, trying to see if she'd finally break. Vega was colder than ever, still blaming her for the failed drills, still refusing to trust her judgment. But Sarah had learned to move through the noise. She didn't need to be liked, she needed to be ready. Because if this raid went wrong, it wouldn't just cost her a spot on the team. It could bury the only lead she had left. 3 nights before deployment, she was ambushed during a night run. It wasn't part of training. No instructors. No safety gear. Just 2 masked men in the woods, fast and silent, like they knew every blind spot in the surveillance. She fought hard. Harder than she thought possible, but one of them whispered something before disappearing into the trees. Just 4 words, back off the case. Her ribs ached, her knuckles were bruised, but the real damage was the message. They knew. Someone inside the system knew what she was chasing. Still, she showed up the next morning like nothing happened. Same calm expression. Same silence. But her hands trembled when she loaded her gear. Because now she wasn't sure who to trust. Anyone on the team could be watching her. Maybe even Vega. The briefing for the raid felt normal on the surface, an arms cache hidden inside a warehouse on the industrial edge of town. But the coordinates matched a property once owned by a shell company linked to Cross. Sarah's heart pounded through every word of the plan. She wasn't ready. Not fully. But she had no choice. If she backed out now, it would all vanish. And she couldn't afford to lose the trail. Not again. As the convoy rolled out, headlights cutting through the early morning fog, Sarah sat in the back of the tactical van, gripping her weapon tighter than ever. Her mind ran through every possibility. Was Mia inside that building? Was this a trap? Were the men who attacked her part of this unit? The radios crackled. Final approach. Weapons hot. She took one breath. Then another. Because what was waiting inside that warehouse would change everything. The tactical van rolled to a stop just before dawn, its engine humming low beneath the thick silence of the industrial zone. Sarah's eyes flicked to the warehouse. From the outside, it looked dead, no lights, no movement, no signs of life. But her gut screamed otherwise. Every part of her wanted to believe she was ready, that she trained hard enough to face whatever was waiting inside. But nothing in her drills or strategy lessons had prepared her for the next 5 minutes. The team leader signaled with 2 fingers. Go. They moved fast. Doors breached, corners cleared. Sarah stayed low and tight behind Vega, every step a silent calculation. Inside, it was colder than she expected, and darker. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Crates lined the walls, ammo, tactical gear, and something worse, surveillance tech. High-end, untraceable equipment. The kind only used by people who didn't want to be found. Her heart skipped. Then the sound hit. A soft click, barely audible, but she caught it. A pressure plate. Booby trap. She stopped just in time, eyes widening as Vega charged ahead. Wait, she called out, but it was too late. A deafening pop echoed through the corridor. Flash bang. Confusion. Screams. When the smoke cleared, the second twist hit. The crates weren't just filled with gear. They were packed with personal files, dozens of them. Names, photos, habits, locations. Some labeled with red stickers, active. Others marked in black, neutralized. Sarah's blood ran cold as she scanned the folders. These weren't just targets. These were civilians. Missing persons. One file slid free and fell open at her feet. Mia's face stared back at her. She dropped to her knees, breath catching in her throat. The file was thick. Surveillance logs, transcripts of tapped calls, and a scribbled note on the final page, transfer, phase 3. Confirmed. Behind her, the radio crackled again. We've got movement on the east exit. Suspect fleeing. Julian Cross. Without thinking, Sarah bolted. Through the narrow hallway, past the flash-burned wall, out into the gray light. She saw him, faded ball cap, black duffel, moving fast toward a blacked-out SUV. She raised her weapon, called out. Stop. He turned. Just slightly. And for the first time, she saw his face, recognizable not just from her files, but from a photo on her mother's mantle. Julian Cross was her father's old partner. The man who vanished after a scandal her family never spoke about. The man who once swore to protect them. Back at the warehouse, officers scrambled to secure the scene. But Sarah stood frozen, file in one hand, rifle in the other, mind racing. This wasn't just about Mia anymore. This was deeper. A network. An operation with ties to people she once trusted. And somehow, her own family had been part of it, years before she even knew what it was. The real enemy wasn't just hiding in the shadows. It had been sitting at her family's table all along. For the next 72 hours, Sarah didn't sleep. Not really. Every second was spent inside briefing rooms, interrogation halls, and surveillance vans, trying to piece together the puzzle that had unraveled everything she thought she knew. The files from the warehouse painted a horrifying picture, an underground operation trafficking information, people, and silence. Victims, like Mia, weren't just taken. They were filtered into a system, monitored, and, if considered a risk, erased. It was cold. Calculated. And all of it had ties back to a select few, some still active in law enforcement, others long thought retired. Julian Cross had gone completely off the grid. But the last ping from the SUV led them to a remote cabin north of the state line. Sarah insisted on going. She had earned her place now, officially sworn in, badge still fresh, but this wasn't about protocol anymore. It was personal. Vega tried to talk her down, even offered to go in first. But she looked him in the eye and said quietly, "If it were your sister, you'd go through the door." They approached at dawn. The team swept the perimeter. Silence. Sarah moved in, one hand on her sidearm, the other clutching a photo of Mia she'd kept folded in her pocket since the day she vanished. The door creaked open. Inside was dim light, dust, and the faint hum of something electrical. She stepped in slowly, scanning every corner. And then she heard it. A voice. Weak. Faint. "Mia." It came from a back room. Her heart thudded as she pushed forward, Vega just behind her. There, on a thin mattress, pale and shaking but alive, was Mia. Gaunt, exhausted, but unmistakably her. The moment their eyes met, Sarah dropped to her knees, every wall she had built crumbling in an instant. "I found you," she whispered, tears slipping down her face. But the relief didn't last long. Behind her, a slow clap echoed through the cabin. Julian stepped from the shadows, older than she remembered, with eyes that had seen too much. He wasn't armed. Not visibly. But he wore a smug calm, like he was always 10 moves ahead. "I knew you'd come," he said. "You were always the sharp one." Sarah stood, gun raised, her hand shaking slightly. "Why?" she asked. "Why take her? Why any of this?" He smiled sadly. "Because the system doesn't protect the innocent. It protects secrets. Your father tried to stop it once. They ruined him for it. I tried to control it. Failed. Now, it just feeds itself." Before she could respond, Vega's voice cut in over the comms. "Hostiles incoming. 4 vehicles. Armed." It was a setup. Julian looked her in the eye. "They won't let any of us leave alive." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Mia, pulled her toward the exit, shouting orders through the radio. Gunfire cracked outside. Flashbangs shattered windows. Chaos erupted. In the middle of the storm, she made a choice: save her sister, or stay and fight a war that never ends. She chose blood. They escaped through the rear woods, covered by Vega and 2 others. Julian disappeared in the smoke, his fate unknown. Back at HQ, Sarah was debriefed, honored, and quietly told to let the rest go. But late that night, when the room was quiet and her sister finally slept, Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the files again. Because even though she'd won the battle, the war had only just begun. Sarah didn't return to SWAT training, she didn't need to. She'd already proven herself. Mia began healing, and the files were sent to trusted hands. Though Julian vanished, Sarah knew the truth was out now. One woman's courage exposed corruption, saved a life, and reminded us, quiet strength can break any system.